This video is not going to be as painful as the last one. I appreciate you hanging in there through 2-1A and 2-1A Part 2 with all of the laws and all of the discrimination and all of that intentional disparate impact, disparate treatment stuff. I hope that you've gone back and looked at that second video, especially another time, to try to get all that down. There's an awful lot to remember, but it's so very, very important and can keep you out of an awful lot of trouble if you can get those concepts and remember those basic things. This particular video for 2-1B now answers the question, what happens if we have been found guilty of discrimination? And it's happened over a significant enough period of time to where somebody has stepped in and said, we need to do something about this. So we will look in this particular section, 2-1B, at affirmative action. That is where a formal process or a formal plan is designed by either us or somebody else who is concerned enough about us to help us to begin to right the wrongs that we've done in the past. Keep in mind that affirmative action typically only happens if we have systemically discriminated against a class or classes of people over a long period of time. If we have apparently discriminated against this one individual, but it's kind of the oddity, there's not a pattern, then likely they're just going to say, you know, make this whole for this person, give them the job and pay them what they would have been making had you hired them the first time to begin with. But we're going to let it drop at this because it's a one-time thing. But if we say, you know what, you've been doing this for the last 10 years. How many people have lost an opportunity because you've done this for the last 10 years, 20 years, whatever? There's a pattern here. And I don't know that we can trust you to make big enough changes to stop this from happening in the future. So affirmative action comes in either because somebody say, you're borderline needing us to come in and take over, but if you'll do these things with us watching you, we'll be okay. Or we're going to have to tell you what to do to fix this. So the formal plan is required of companies to begin to right past wrongs, typically only after a pattern of abuse. When we get instructed to engage in equal employment opportunity actions, EEO actions as driven by the EEOC, we become colorblind. We become such that we treat everyone equally. There's a little bit of a move here in the interviewing process as you're scanning resumes and things like that to give them a number and to eliminate anything that could tell the reviewer if you're male or female, if you're black or white, if you're Baptist or Muslim, any of those kinds of things, and just look at the qualifications until you decide who meets enough of the qualifications to hire, and at that point you kind of learn who some of these people are. That is colorblind. That is treating everyone equally. And certain things the EEO can do to help us to right past wrongs are actions that help us to be colorblind or gender blind or race blind or whatever the case may be. And as long as we're treating everyone equally, we won't have disparate treatment. We could still end up with disparate impact. You remember those terms from the last lesson. Another way that we are asked or made to correct past wrongs is through affirmative action. And that is not where we are colorblind. That is where we are color conscious. So it's not so much saying just treat everybody the same, treat everybody fair. The problem is that you've got so many white guys working for you that you don't have nearly enough females, you don't have nearly enough Hispanics or African Americans or anything like that. In fact, if we look at the community that you're in, we see that it is 50-50 male to female. It is 50-40-10 Caucasian, African American, Hispanic, and your company is almost 100% white males. If you reflect your community, you ought to have almost as many females working there as men. You ought to have almost as many African Americans as Caucasians with a small pool of Hispanics. So we're going to have to say you can't treat everybody equally for some period of time until we get this thing leveled out. You almost need to be discriminatory against white men in your attempt to hire females, in your attempt to hire African Americans and Hispanics. So color conscious. Because company, Mr. CEO, you have messed up so much in the past, Now you have to start consciously thinking about those groups that you excluded in the past until they get caught up. So that's affirmative action as opposed to EEO. So what are methods that we can use to do this? Utilization analysis is what I just kind of described. If our community is 52% African American, it's not unreasonable to expect our company to be 52% African American. Not down to the decimal points in the 10th place, but reasonably speaking, if our community is about half African American, there ought to be about half African Americans working here. Now that doesn't mean that we've got 100 employees and 52 have to be African American. I might say if we got 45 or 40, we're pretty close to the breakdown. We would certainly be happier with 45 than we would with 2. So we need to get that number up to be able to utilize this utilization analysis. If there are too few African Americans in our company, as is reflected in our community, we've got to hire African Americans and give them extra weight in the process until we build that number up to where we look like our community. And we have to avoid people who aren't African Americans, even if in some cases they're much more qualified, because we can train people. Affirmative action plans are a step beyond that, where there's actually a process laid out. In March, when this position comes open, you're going to hire an African American female. And you go find African American females who might be able to do this job and get them to apply. And we lay out guidelines, goals, timetables, action steps, and so forth. That's the bulk of 2.1b, and that's only at the 6-minute mark. The last thing I wanted to really focus you on in this particular section is the taking a closer look, which is table 2-1. What are some ways that we can do affirmative action or preferential treatment? One way is through preferential recruitment. And that's where we say, okay, we've got an accounting position open and we can look around here and say we don't have enough female accountants. So we're going to go to a place where female accountants tend to hang out and we're going to recruit from that place. That's okay. That is targeted recruitment. Preferential. We're going to recruit you with a preference because you're the female that we need to bring up our numbers. That's okay to have preferential treatment. We can also do 1-for-1 hiring, and that's okay sometimes, oftentimes. Okay, I want to hire a white male because I can't find anybody better. But if I'm going to hire a white male, I've got to be willing to hire an African American female to some job. All right? Maybe there's no way I can get around having to have this particular person in this job. But if I hire another person at the same time who fits one or more of those protected classes that we've discriminated against in the past, instead of adding one and adding 0, we've added 1 apiece. So we're starting very slowly to change the ratios by increasing the denominators and the numerators. So 1-for-1 hiring is oftentimes okay. If we're way out of whack, if we're 98.2, hiring 1 apiece, 99.3 is not legitimate, but 98.3 is a little bit better. We can also do preferential layoffs, and that's oftentimes okay. All right, we're way out of whack. It's time for us to downsize a little bit. So instead of releasing the people who just came, the least seniority, maybe we're going to target this group of white guys, and we're gonna lay off these 10 white guys. So in our company that is 70-30 white to African American black, we're going to let go these 10, and when we try to refill these 10, we're going to hire 10 blacks. So instead of being 70-30, now it's going to be 60-40. And that makes up a big difference real quick. So preferential layoffs. We're going to lay off people who are in the overrepresented population and at some point hire in those who are in the underrepresented population. And as we're doing this layoff, we're not going to consider people who were in the underrepresented population. Unfair to the people? Yeah, it is, but you've been unfair to others. So I guess that comes around. That's oftentimes okay. Another way that we can make up the difference is through extra consideration in hiring. And that's a case where we don't specifically look for an African American, but when we have them in the pool and we get to the top 2 or 3, any one of which we'd be willing to hire, if one of them is African American, they get bonus points. They're equal to the white female. But because they're African American, we give them extra consideration. And that's okay too, because they're qualified otherwise. It's not unfair to the female that we're giving an equally qualified applicant a little more consideration because they're part of a demographic that we've overlooked in the past. Differential standards is another way that we can make up the difference. And that's where we say, okay, if you're a white male, we expect you to do A, B, C, D, and E. If you happen to be an African American female, we're not going to expect A, B, C, D, and E. As long as you can do A and B, we're going to hire you. So we're going to have different standards. That's not okay. I mean, that's one way that you could do it. Hire people who aren't quite qualified. But if you're not being equal in what we expect, remember the last one about extra consideration, the assumption is they are equal, and we're giving you a couple of bonus points. It's not okay to say, we're going to expect them to do these 5 things, but we're only going to make you do these 2, simply because you're part of this classification. That's an easy way to build up our numbers, but that is not okay. And then minority positions. It kind of sounded a little bit like that earlier, but this is not a case where we say we've got a marketing position open and we're only going to take applications from Hispanics. That is not okay. That is intentional discrimination from the opposite direction. We've got to allow people to apply. We've got to hold them to the same standards. We can give them extra consideration if they're otherwise equally or reasonably qualified. Nothing says that we have to hire the most perfectly qualified candidate that we have. There are minimum expectations, and some people go way beyond those minimum, but they don't necessarily mean they're going to be a much better employee than somebody who meets the qualifications but doesn't grossly exceed them. And we may be fine with somebody who meets the expectations. As long as you meet the expectations and you're part of a protected class that we've been underrepresenting in the past, it's okay for us to move towards that particular person. So the summary of this is that if you're in a position where you have to have some action taken to eliminate problems that you've had in the past, there's some ways to go about doing it. Sometimes you may be forced to do it. Sometimes they may just say, you need to work on this and we'll check back with you in 5 years to see how you look. That table is a really good reference of things that you can do to increase the number of these underrepresented classes in a way that's not illegal. Now, I hope that covers that section real well. As a reward for listening for 40 minutes to the last one, I'm getting you out of here with 12 minutes on this one. Thank me later. But we've covered this material. Moving on to the next one here very shortly.